What's up guys, welcome to the channel, and in today's video we are going to talk about what are the different types of data types, what is a variable, how to typecast, and how can we input in Python. If you haven't accessed this Python for Absolute Beginners playlist, you can go on my channel and click on playlist, and then you can click on view playlist under the Python for Absolute Beginners playlist. This is the 7th video of it, and if you haven't accessed this, I recommend you to do because I'm going to add more and more information in it. I'm going to add more exercises and more projects in it. Only one person has took advantage of this playlist, so I hope you do as well and please access it. Moving on, I'm going to open my PyCharm IDE. Let's start off with an analogy. For example, if you have a container, a Horlicks empty box, and if you have some packets of spices, for example chili flakes or oregano, if you don't want these packets and you just want these spices, you want to throw away these packets, you are definitely going to store it here if you have some brains. And in what happens in this box is that the spices keep on getting added, and at one point it gets filled. So what this container does is that it stores all of these spices. Just like a container, a variable acts the same as well. We can store a string in it, we can store a number in it. For example, you can store a name into a variable, you can store a number 105 or any random number you want. You can store it in a variable. So that's what a variable does. It acts as a container for you. I'll elaborate what is a variable by going to the PyCharm IDE. I'll create a new file and name it as tut7 because this is the 7th video of my Python playlist. After this, I'm going to write var1 is equal to double quotes and code with unch. This double quotes makes this code with unch a string. For example, if I write code with unch, it gives me a red line here showing that it is an unresolved reference. The Python interpreter doesn't know what does this mean. Is it an int type? Is it a string type? Is it a float type? Is it a boolean type? It doesn't know. So we are going to write double quotes to inform the Python interpreter that this is a string. After this, I'm going to write a second variable and name it as var2. I'm going to store a number in it, for example 56. And then if I want to store a precise number, for example 56.78, I'll make another variable and I'll write it as 56.78. Now I'll tell you how can we make variables. First of all, don't use a space in the variable name. Your Python interpreter does not know what is this because you have added a space in your variable name, and that confuses the Python interpreter. So never make a variable name with a space in it. A underscore might be acceptable, but a space is not acceptable. So never include a space in your variable name and keep it as short as possible because variable names should be accessible at some point. You don't want to write code with unch everywhere you want if you want to print it 100 times. So you just have to create a short name for your variable. And after this, I'm going to print type. Now this type function tells me which type of data type is this. So inside this type function, I'm going to write var1. It will tell me that what the type is this var1. If I run this program, as you can see, it is str type. What is an str type? It is abbreviated for a string type. A string type is, for example, something like code with unch or your name. You can write anything inside these double quotes and that will be a string. So this is a string type. If I write var2 instead of var1, it will show that it is a int type. Int is abbreviated for integer type. And if I write var3, it is not an integer type, it is a float type. Why? Because we have included a decimal here. We have made it more precise about what the number is. So this is a float type, not an integer type. After that, I'm going to make another variable and name it as var4. I'm going to make it true. Now what is true? We'll talk about that later in this playlist about the conditions about what is true. But if I print the type of this var4, as you can see, it is a boolean type, and a boolean type is always true or false. For example, if a person whose height is 6'3" is taller than a person's height who is 5'3", then that is true. But if someone says that the person with the 5'3" height is taller than the person who is 6'3", then that's completely false. So that's what Boolean type is. It is always true or it is false. So if I write that where4 is true, and if I print the type of where4, it is going to come that it is a Boolean type. So that's what Boolean is. Now, these are the 4 types that you will get in the Python language, and I'll quickly write that down here. So I'll erase this off. And I'll write it for you. What are the different types of data types? One is integer type. Second is float. Third is string. And the fifth is Boolean. In other languages such as C and C++, you can get data types, for example, long int, double, unsigned int, long int, and signed long float. So these types of data types, they really make C and C++ a confusing language, and that is why Python is a really easy language to learn for a beginner. So it has only 4 data types, and after this, I'll write var1 plus var2. After I run this, it will give me an error. Why? Because an integer cannot be added to a string. But, if I write var3 instead of var2, you will see that it will give me 112.78. Now let me run it. As you can see, it is giving me 112.78. Why? Because it can add a float type and an integer type, but it cannot add a string type to an integer type and a string type to a float type or a string type to a Boolean type. It cannot add these data types with. But if I write var2, no, var3 is equal to code with unch. And if I try to add var1 and var5, if I run this program, as you can see, it is giving me name code with unch. That means I've concatenated these two strings and I've added name and code with unch right here. I haven't added their value, but I've concatenated. For example, if your name and if you want to join your surname here, you can add your name and surname using this plus operator. We'll talk about what is an operator later in this playlist, but right now keep absorbing what I'm saying. And you cannot add boolean with a boolean or a float with an integer. So you cannot. So similarly, you cannot add a boolean type to any other of the data types. If I write a is equal to, now what is a? I'm going to make it as a variable. So I'm going to write a is equal to input, and I'm going to write print enter a number. I'll comment this, or I'll just multi-line comment it by using the triple double quotes. As you can see, I've typed in print enter a number and a is equal to input. Now what this input function does is that it takes input from the console. You can type in any number you want in the a during runtime. So if I run this program, as you can see, it is telling me to enter a number and I can type in anything I want. For example, 3, 4, 5, or even a string, for example, unch. So if I run this, if I enter the thing that I entered, for example, if I had entered 105 or unch, it will get stored in the variable a. A is a variable that will store the input that we provide here. So that is how the input function works. After this, if I duplicate these lines, and if I want to print a plus b, if I run this program, it is telling me to enter a number. So if I type 3, if I type 4, as you can see, it has given me 34. But we expected 7. So why is it giving us 34? It is due to the reason because when we input inside Python, the Python interpreter takes it as a string as a default. As you saw in the earlier example, when we added string and string, it it concatenated, right? For example, name and surname. Just like that, 3 becomes a string and 4 becomes a string. So it will print out 34 instead of 7. But how can we make it into an integer? By typecasting the input. How can we typecast? Whichever data type you want your input in, you just have to write the data type and parenthesis, and whatever is inside this parenthesis will be into a int, because that is what you have wrote outside the parenthesis. So b will be an integer type, and similarly I will make a as an integer type as well. So a will be an integer type and b will be an integer type, and integer type plus integer type will print out an integer type, that will be 7. If I run this program and I enter the same input that I gave before, as you can see, it has printed 7. That means that a is now an integer rather than a string that it was previously, and b is an integer, and previously it was a string because we did not typecast it into an integer. So that's how you can typecast, and I want to show you how we can print many lines. For example, if you want to print 100 lines, and if you want to print, for example, var1, I'll write var1 as hello world. So if you want to print var1, and if I run this program, it will print hello world 100 times. And if I put an escape sequence, that is \n, that stands for a new line, and if I run this, as you can see, it has printed hello world, and after that it has printed a new line here that is highlighted in blue. So this is how we can print so many strings without giving much effort, and we can print multiple number of strings using this. But when I want to print var2, that is 56, and if I type print 100 into var2, it will not print 5600 times. It will print 5600. As you can see, it has printed 5600. Why? Because this 100 is an integer type and this 56 is an integer type as well. So integer type into integer type will multiply it, and then it will print out the result. Now how can we print 5600 times? We'll have to typecast 56 into a string type. So whenever 100 is multiplied by a string type, it will print only the string type 100 times. So if I write str, the data type that I want to transform it into, and then parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis whatever thing that you want to transform it into, the data type that you have written outside the parenthesis. So that is the syntax that the Python, that is the syntax in the Python for typecast. If I run this program, as you can see, it has printed out 56, 56, 56. But if I want to add a \n character, I'll just write n is equal to \n. So it will print a new line character after every 56. If I run this, oops, it has printed a new line character right here. So I can't do this. Instead of that, I'll write 56 and a \n character. And this should do the job for me. As you can see, it has printed 5600 times with a new line character at the end. So that's how you can print multiple number of strings without taking the effort of writing a string 100 times. So in this video, we talked about what are the different types of data types, variables, and how to typecast and input in Python. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and please access the playlist. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.